By 2016, more than 50% of all mobile apps in development will be a hybrid approach. Why might this be, and what is this approach? My name is Matt Netko, and this is Seeing the Forest for the Trees, building fully featured hybrid mobile apps. Before we get started, a little bit about the agenda for the talk here. I'm going to be starting out with talking about my mobile app that I've been developing for about a year now, and a little bit about my background, kind of to set the stage here. From there, we'll go into talking about why you might choose the hybrid mobile app approach. And then from there, I actually have steps and demos where we'll build out an app both from the website and the native side. Additionally, we'll touch on performance, definitely a huge concern with folks building out these types of apps. And lastly, some key takeaways. So, my mobile app and background. So about a year ago, I had an idea for an app. My company HR department gave us all Fitbit devices, so I became a Fitbit user. For those of you that may or may not be familiar, Fitbit provides these activity and calorie tracking devices that you wear. Additionally, I was a Fitwatchr member and still am. I noticed that there was an opportunity for an integration between the two, combining the Fitwatchr's mentality with the Fitbit calorie tracking that didn't exist. So my idea was to come up with a mobile app that could satisfy this, and that app is Fitwatchr. I had a few different outcomes I wanted to achieve by building out the app. Wanted to build something challenging, do some different calorie tracking things not done before. Have the app available for all mobile platforms, so the main three, iOS, Google Play, and Windows Phone. Additionally, I wanted to charge for the app to receive a little bit of payment for it. And last, be able to have fast development cycles. I was going to be working alone to start with, so wanted, in order to hit all three platforms, needed a sort of one-size-fits-all solution that could still maintain the type of quality app that I wanted to build. So, and what the basis for this talk is on today, I was able to achieve all these desired outcomes. So, some of the results here. I built the initial version of the app just in days, just days of nights and weekend work, just really a few handful of hours. The app is available for iOS, Android, and Windows Phone 8, so I was able to achieve my goal of getting it on multiple platforms. The price does vary from 99 cents to $2.99 depending on the platform, and I was able to secure over 10,000 paying users in 1 year for the app. So you can see, using the approach I'm going to be talking about today, it is possible that it is definitely a viable solution for building out these types of apps. This is Fitwatchr across all different platforms, the Android, iPhone, and Windows Phone. You can see it looks how you would expect a standard app to look on each platform. Achieving this can be very difficult, especially when you're a single developer. So we're going to talk about how I did this. You can see everything looks very well put together, very clean UI, and mimics everything, the native look and feel for each of the platforms. A little bit about me. I think this is really relevant because you'll see I don't actually come from a mobile app development background, but I was able to put something together that is well received and actually sells. So how did I do this? Well, so I actually currently, as of July 2014, have been with a company in Chicago called the Savo Group. We do sales productivity software as a service company. Traditionally, my background is actually in more .NET C# development, more automation, back-end tools, things like that. Not a lot of front-end work. Not at all. The past year or so, through my own company I set up, NetcoSoft, I've been doing the mobile app development. So this is all shifted focus from back-end to all front-end development. It's entirely PhoneGap based and hybrid apps, and partnered with a team of two. So I do have a graphic designer friend that helps me with some of the icons and graphics, things like that. Additionally, I do blog over at netco.com. A lot of things on PhoneGap and hybrid app development, programming, and technology trends. So when I got started and wanted to build this app about a year ago, there's three main paths that I could have chosen. Let's talk about what those might be, just to give a high-level overview. So on the upper left here, this is a great image from Salesforce.com that shows the different paths and the pros and cons here. On the upper left here, we have the native approach. So naturally, this is the individual software development kit for each platform, what the company has really defined as the best approach in their eyes and what they support. So of course, you're going to get the fastest performance. You have access to the App Store distribution to sell the apps like I had wanted, and the most advanced UI and performance type interactions. But while you do have the full capability here of the phone and all the mobile features that come with that, it's limited to a single platform. So again, I wanted to reach as many platforms as possible with the least amount of effort and time, so this wasn't going to work as well for me. In the lower right here, we have the HTML5 approach. So this is where you'd actually build more of a website that looks like an app. So here you're using your existing web developer skills. Because it's a website that you'd control and not through an app store, you'd be able to push out instant updates if there's any bugs or features you wanted to add. And then of course unrestricted distribution. You're not tied to any company's store. It's all just delivered through a browser. So here you do, which is great, you can reach all multiple platforms really in the sense of anyone on their mobile device can load up the page and view it, but you only have partial capabilities. So you don't have access to all the great device-specific features like Bluetooth, GPS, things like that you'd want to use necessarily on the phone. So the solution here is to use a hybrid approach. So a hybrid approach is the combination of native code and web code. So here again, you're using your existing web developer skills, or if you're like me that didn't really come from a web development background, there's some things you can do to get started, and only a little bit you have to learn to get started, which is great. You still get access to the native platform. So again, your phone specific GPS, Bluetooth, sensor device type things that the tablets and mobile devices give us over the web, you can access, and we'll look into how to do that. And lastly, you do have App Store distribution. So here this is the best of both worlds, really. You get the full capability of what, in this case, I was looking to do as well, and access to all the multiple platforms. Before I get into demos and other things like that and show how I build out my apps and can currently do, let's talk about why you might choose the hybrid approach. So why hybrid? From the technology perspective, I kind of just touched on this a little bit. So again, you're able to use your existing HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript knowledge. Again, even coming from my background, getting up to speed on these technologies, if you have at least a little bit of a programming background, not too difficult. Additionally, you can still leverage your native code knowledge. So again, that would be Objective-C with Apple, Java with the Android Google Play Store, and C# for the Windows Phone Store. So if you're like me and you do have some experience in these languages, you're not necessarily starting from scratch. You can leverage some of these to do some interaction with the device as well. We'll get into how that works. Additionally, there's access to the full capabilities from the technology side. So when I had mentioned leveraging Bluetooth, GPS, all those kind of unique phone functions, we have device APIs that we can use, and we'll talk into what those look like. And last, of course, multiple platforms: iOS, Android, Windows Phone, and many more. With the web becoming so ubiquitous, there's always more platforms being added, so the possibilities are honestly limitless. Why hybrid? Might you choose a hybrid app approach from a business standpoint? I think this is really something that developers don't necessarily think of, and it's really important. Honestly, the biggest item there is lower cost. So you're working with, again, a write once, run everywhere kind of mindset, building from a single code base, single technology stack, again, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and the ability to reuse existing business logic code. So most businesses will come into this wanting to build an app and have other tools and technology used. So we'll talk about how you can do that in a little bit, but that you're not necessarily starting from scratch here. Why does this matter? So whether you choose a hybrid or even native approach, overall the BYOD, or bring your own device trend, continues to gain momentum across the workplace and other things. No longer are folks necessarily getting Blackberries assigned to them from the company. They're bringing their own phone from home. So the rise of mobile is still on the rise in 2014. Additionally, remote work is increasing across every industry. So once again, there's just more and more demand for mobile apps. So it's definitely in 2014 for sure something that if you even whether or not you have experience with, it's something you should be at least aware of and what the different approaches are. What about the hybrid approach from an individual basis? So here's what I feel are the best reasons to use this approach. So more opportunities are springing up. Web technology again is being used increasingly across tons of different devices and platforms. So beyond the mobile set, there's TV, cars nowadays shipping with APIs you can interact with, smartwatches like the Pebble device has JavaScript API. So those skills are increasingly going to be useful. Additionally, the tools and frameworks are constantly getting better. So including some of the ones we're going to talk about today, the barrier to entry is a lot lower. So whether you're trying to learn front-end technologies or get other folks interested, everything keeps getting better and better and easier to get into. And lastly, from the career perspective, so developers that are strong in both front-end and back-end technologies, really both ends of the world there, are going to be very highly desired. Being able to work with both of those and provide end-to-end solutions from front to back, very useful. So let's talk about how we might create a hybrid mobile app and some of the technologies that I use personally. So again, there's two main portions of this. You can see on the image to the right here, we have the web and the native side of things, native code. So the web technologies will use all the all the application logic will be built in JavaScript. For the layout and styling of the app, we'll use HTML and CSS. And then what that'll get us, of course, is really just a website. So how do we turn that into an actual app that we can ship onto the stores? So that's really the secret sauce there is we need a sort of additional native code if we're going to leverage the device APIs, and a native shell, so something that contains our web code and can run it as an app. So to do this, we'll actually use what's called a web view container. So that's basically a lightweight implementation of a browser that's running your web code inside of an app. How might we create the hybrid app from the web perspective? Let's look at this. So again, first off, from the application logic, we'll use JavaScript, and that'll be the main language we're going to use for this. So actually, there's really no surprises here how in terms of tips and tricks on how to do this. You'd write your JavaScript normally as you would if it were a regular website, as you would for an app. You can define classes, use existing libraries and frameworks. You'd hopefully write your unit tests the same way and use those the same way. It's all perfectly doable. Additionally, all the popular frameworks are compatible. So AngularJS, Knockout, which I actually use in my app, Backbone, they either just work out of the box or they have special techniques that are published and easily defined on how to integrate them when you're building a mobile app. From the layout and styling side of things, so this can be tricky. You can certainly build and use these technologies and use a unique UI, something that doesn't accomplish the same look and feel as a native app, and that's fine. If you're really looking to achieve that, though, that can be very difficult because again, each platform looks very different. So how might you do this? And that was a big concern of mine. This is increasingly important, getting design right as developers, because more and more, while we do have a lot of mobile teams starting up, they're not necessarily as large as your other back-end or services teams. So you've got smaller teams, but you have to be at least somewhat aware of how to do good design or at least appreciate it. So understanding it is becoming more and more important. So here's an example. This is actually a Netflix app that I built a few years ago that is native. But as you can see, even with some standard UI items, the colors look terrible. The doesn't scale well, and this is just using the native Android components from just a few years ago. Getting the layout and styling right is challenging. So some of the items we have to think about that I touched on there. Achieving a native look across all three platforms or more is difficult. Building something that's touch friendly as well, because you're not building a website, you're dealing with phones and tablets that have touchscreens. There's special considerations for that. Additionally, responsiveness, which is, you can see from my two images here, being able to scale up and down and look and style things well, whether you're on a phone, smaller screen, or a tablet and stretched out. So you can see out of the box, everything's going to get stretched out if you don't account for tablet sizes, things like that. So what's the solution for this? How might we achieve a native look, be able to scale it and be responsive, things like that? Well, if you're like me, let's use a mobile framework to do the heavy lifting. There's a bunch of them out there, which I have here. So including Telerx KendoUI, Sensia Touch, jQuery Mobile, which has been around and very popular, and even the Ionic framework, which is getting very popular. So for my mobile app experience, what I highly recommend, Telerx KendoUI. Absolutely fantastic framework. Let's talk about why. So this is taken right off of their website. This is KendoUI Mobile. So part of a larger application suite, but the mobile JavaScript framework itself, absolutely the best feature of it, it gives you a native-like UI for each of the different platforms out of the box, and that's what I'll be demoing in a little bit here. Just absolutely great. They are very focused on performance. So because you're adding in yet another framework to your app, you want to make sure you're using something that's well written. Well, they focus on performance out of the box. Additionally, all of their widgets and features you might use integrate touch support, do have some responsive capabilities, and even integrate with Bootstrap. And last, they do have fantastic documentation, lots of sample apps you can download to get started. KendoUI Mobile is actually part of a larger KendoUI framework. So we'll just be focusing on the mobile side of things, but just as an FYI, they do have other features, a lot of ASP.NET controls that are great, some customizable themes that you can set a color palette and export the CSS for your app or apps. And lastly, a great model view model framework's included in it, so similar to Knockout.js, if you've seen that. A great kind of framework, which we're not going to cover today, but a great way to represent your app structure and content, things like that. So let's switch over to the KendoUI demo here. So I have two items open here. Google Chrome over here on the left with my app, and on the right in Sublime Text, just a basic index.html page, very basic HTML. So on the left, you can see that I have not that great of a start of an app. Doesn't look that great. Really, just a few list item and an unordered list item list. Sure, I have a picture for Eduardo here, a couple text boxes, things like that. On the right, this is just a simple HTML file, linking in a couple little CSS things here, but really just very basic to start. So if we wanted to get started with this and build this into an app, how might we do this? Well, so KendoUI provides you out of the box the concept of a single page application, or a SPA, as you might hear it referred to. So what that means is you're building out individual screens, individual views of the app, and we have to define those some way. So let's get started with that. Let's assume that this page here on the left is my profile page for this user. So everything in KendoUI is, for the most part, with the defining these, are div tags. So everything within this div will be this particular view. So I'll add in a little bit of code here for both of these. Okay, so what did I just do here? Every element that Kendo uses to style things always has the data attribute. So data dash something. In this case, data dash role on this main starting div of view, which is Kendo uses a lot of reserved keywords. It knows what to do with these. You'll see the result in a second here. Data role of view. So this tells it, okay, basically this is going to be one screen of our app. Additionally, the list view here for this collection of elements, you see I basically again just have list items for profile, just some basic input controls down here, things like that, nothing too fancy. So we've got that set up. The only other item we have to do to get this started is come down here and there's what's just really great, just one line of code here to instantiate a new Kendo app. So we just have new Kendo mobile app. We pass in, there's two parameters you can pass in: the document body, which is just gives it the full range of HTML to work with and manipulate, and for now at least, an empty set of options, and we'll fill that in a little bit. So with that saved, I save the file, come back over to Google Chrome and refresh. Ooh, ta-da, look at that. So as you can see, we went from before, where it didn't look that great and had no styling to it, to after, where it looks like a standard iOS 7 UI with just a little bit of code, one line of code and some HTML attributes. So you see over here we have similar gray headers. It's organized nicely. Those input text boxes I had before are now touch or clickable. They're just slider controls. There's other controls out of the box, and that's great. So we've got a good starting page. That's fine. But what if we wanted to add another view, another page within it? So I'll actually come back down here. And what if we wanted a settings screen? So maybe we can just add some more things. You know, nothing too fancy to show this. So again, we have a data role of view and another list view. So let's do that. So let's actually save and come over here and refresh the page. Something's not right here. So we haven't, there's something interesting. So we actually need to tell Kendo about this second settings page. Right now it has no look, and again, because this is a single page application, it's not going to show both divs like you would have in a normal web page. We don't want to show that. We want to separate them somehow as different screens in the app, right? So coming down here, we can actually add just another div set here. Adding a new data role of layout, another kind of reserved keyword, will help us accomplish this. So let's say I wanted to actually have some buttons either at the top of the page or the bottom, a header or a footer, and have buttons that could switch between the two screens. We can add that in very easily. So in this case, I'm going to use a footer control. So we have another nested div in here with the data role of footer, and then a tab strip control. We'll see what that looks like. But that basically gives us the native styling of both different buttons and a footer tab strip. Additionally, I have just a couple anchor tags, which are used for hyperlinks and navigating around. A couple anchor tags for both our profile and our settings screen. The only last step that we really need to do to put this in here is tell Kendo about the layout. So that's what we'll do here. So this is where these options down here come in. So we're telling Kendo, okay, for our layout, use this footer layout, which you can see is I've marked as data ID footer layout. So this tells Kendo to point back to here to load up this footer. Additionally, there's tons of options for KendoUI, which is really cool. We can do a slide transition, different animations as you flip between views or screens in this case. So we'll see what that looks like. So I've saved the file, come back, here's before, and let's refresh. All right, so now we can see on the bottom, we've got our profile screen and our settings screen. Clicking between the two, you saw that transition. I'll go back and forth a couple times here. Looks really nice, very much like an app would. And we've got our settings, which is back up here, Just those settings being displayed, nothing else from the profile page. So we've got a basic app going now, and we can still toggle between everything. So that's great. So this is a great way to get started with KendoUI, very easy to get set up. And what's additionally great, which I recommend using Google Chrome for, is what if we wanted to see what it might look like in Android or Windows Phone. So if you press F12 to open the developer tools, we can actually do this. So by default, Kendo is going to use the most recent version of iOS. There's nothing you saw in the code over here with the app declaration, nothing I had to do that. You can specify it as an option directly, or if you want it to automatically pick up and read the user agent of the phone or the phone's browser, it's going to do that. So that's how it knows, as you'll see here, that's how it knows from the user agent which styling to do. So if you leave this be as is and we ship this as an app, it wouldn't style as Android on iOS. It just automatically knows from the user agent. So here we're going to come over to, with the drawer, we're going to go to the emulation tab and click on spoof user agent. So here I have it set to Android 4.0, maybe a Galaxy Nexus. You can actually see what the user agent will look like. We don't really care in this case, right? So I'll come back up here and refresh the page, and look at that. Not having to do any code. Kendo automatically takes care of us for it. It's super fast. You wouldn't really notice. Great for debugging locally. We can build virtually the entire app on your computer without having a test device necessarily. The styling's changed, so these sliders now are on or off, just like Android. And what's interesting is the footer becomes more of a header with the Android styling, and a little bit different stuff, but you still have the same app, and we can uncheck that spoof user agent, refresh, and we're back to iOS. So there's how to use the KendoUI framework. Coming back over here, one element I don't necessarily have a demo for, but I think it's useful to touch on, is the responsive UI element. So this is the case where, like I had mentioned, if you have different, working with a phone or a tablet, how are we going to sort of scale up and things like that? So I think it's really worth it to touch on. What we're going to actually use for this are called CSS media queries. So here is one that you might use for a phone, and a quick example. So you have this @media only screen, but really the key part of this CSS that matters is the min device width and the max device width. So here we have, let's say, maybe these settings, anything that falls within here, well, the browser knows to use this. So in the previous example where I had maybe a smaller screen, in this case a phone, let's say between 320 and 480 pixels, we'll use this setting. So let's say this is a CSS class for an image, a round image. Maybe if this is saying for these settings, I want to set the height to 40% and the width to 75. Additionally, if we come over and think about iPads or tablets, something a larger width, there's a million different rules you can do, but some of the basics are, again, with the min and max. So maybe we've bumped up to 768 to 1024. Well, maybe we have more screen size, so we want the image to go up to 60% and the width to 80. And this would continue on for any other rules. So of course you'd have in your code, your HTML, you'd apply these CSS classes, and it would scale up and down depending on the device. So this actually isn't too difficult, even for any developers that are kind of new or struggle with CSS like I do. And lastly, for like a desktop or laptop experience, you can say, okay, maybe for those types of things, you don't even need to set a max. You can set the min width of 1224 pixels. We have a lot more real estate. Let's actually bump that height down to 20%. So that's a high-level overview of building a responsive UI with CSS media queries. So as we can see, this looks a lot better. Here on the left we have our before, and on the right our after. Two different apps, yes, but you can see how clean and how easy it is to achieve a native look and feel. This is actually taken from the current version of my Fitwatchr app. I have a bunch of different settings here, some different data points that are dynamically populated. This is a date picker control, things like that, and it looks great. So showing off KendoUI, you might think, well, this is just awesome, not having to being able to get started, not having to build a lot of custom CSS. But what about the cost? Well, unfortunately, as of early 2013, it was part of a larger. It's part of a larger suite and costs $700. So a little harder for indie devs looking to build out apps. I get that. That shied me away for a while. But fortunately, end of last year in late 2013, they split it out into its own framework and dropped it down to 199, which is great. Much better. Could still probably do better, right? Well, as I was preparing this presentation for a talk that I gave on it, they announced in April 2014 a free and open source version of the KendoUI core capabilities. So this provides you most of and everything that I just demoed out of the box, and just really doesn't have charts and some other features that you might consider upgrading to. So that's just absolutely incredible that they did this. You can go get the code and start building right away what I just demoed and more. So that was kind of an overview of the web approach that we might take to build an app. Let's look at what it takes to build the native part, which is not the most intuitive necessarily. So again, from my little hybrid app picture here, we looked at how to build the web app portion, but we've still got this missing native part. So the native shell that goes around the web code, access to device APIs and device specific features, and maybe even native code that we might need. How might we do that? Well, the largest item we can use to help us with the native portion is PhoneGap. So this is an open source JavaScript framework that implements all the native wiring for you. So meaning it's fully aware of trying to build a mobile app and handles a lot of things behind the scenes automatically for you. Additionally, it provides access to all the device features we've been talking about, your Bluetooth, your other types of things like that, specific to tablets and phones, via JavaScript APIs. So you're not actually going to run as an app developer native code yourself and have to learn those languages. You just use JavaScript, which is what you're familiar with. The one drawback here, though, that I found quickly is you do still need to use the individual platform SDKs. So what you end up doing is downloading the PhoneGap framework and inserting it into an iOS project or a Google Android Java project. So with that approach, that's fine, but you're still having to learn and download all these SDKs and developer tools specific to that. They can be very hard to set up and takes a lot of time. So for me, I was kind of looking for something that would go a little smoother and not require me to learn all these things. So what I used is PhoneGap Build. So this is a cloud service from Adobe that actually creates the native app package for you and also injects PhoneGap into it. So this is really the bread and butter of creating an app as a solo developer from Adobe. You don't need any of the SDKs because they're building it for you. Any compilers or hardware. One caveat, building for iOS does require a Mac in the end for working with security certificates and getting it uploaded to the store. So if you're like me, you might find a friend that has a Mac that you can borrow, or consider, if you really get into building these types of apps, consider investing in a Mac, because there is, at the end of the day, no way around that. What's really great about their service is you have one private app that you can use for free. And what that means is what labels a public app is something that's open source. So something that's hosted on GitHub or other projects. You can pull it right in from GitHub, which is nice, and you have unlimited of those. But if you want to have something that's private, so probably something you're going to sell, like I was doing, you only have one free option. But I believe as of now, currently in 2014, it's just $10 a month for their service. Well worth it given the time savings that they give you. Let's look a little bit about PhoneGap Build, some of the features, because beyond just building a native app for you, which is great, they have tons of excellent tools that come along with that. The first one are the plugins. So plugins are really what fill in our missing native functionality. Because if you think about it, at the end of the day, if we're using JavaScript and HTML and CSS for a web app, you're still really building just a web app that you're retrofitting into a native app. So that's fine. You still don't have to write native code. A lot of folks have done that for us already. So you get things like camera interaction, an in-app browser. That's really handy and what I use for third-party authentication. So with my app being a Fitbit app, connecting using OAuth to a third-party service is really handy, and that's doable. And even something like Google Analytics you can integrate, which is really helpful for figuring out new features and bugs and things like that. You can see what exact buttons everyone's using, what features they're not maybe, and go from there. So all of that is actually native code, but you're calling that in with JavaScript APIs. You don't have to learn the internal guts. There's documentation for that. There's also the hydration feature. So kind of a neat term, but basically what this is it allows you to automatically deploy new app versions to your test devices. So this is really handy whether you're working individually or with a team. The very first time you get the app, that you download the app onto the device, you have to connect it, usually USB, to the phone and get it on there. Well, if you're building for your QA team, things like that, and you have new versions, that would be really tedious to overwrite the old one from before. So turning this on just adds a little bit more code and size to your app. And what happens is every time you upload a new version and they open the app on their phone or device, they get notified that there's a new one, and it downloads and reinstalls automatically. So that's really handy. And lastly, their remote debugging tools are absolutely fantastic. You can see what your app code looks like on the device, look at storage, so local storage or SQL databases that you're using within the phone. If you think a value is corrupt or not what you'd expect it, you can inspect that right in there when the app's open and running, all in real time. So you open up the phone, you open up the app itself and go into a browser, and you can connect those two and see what's going on. This is especially useful for debugging plugin behavior, because again, that is one of the drawbacks. Is those are while you do have access to the code, if you don't know those other languages, it's a bit of a black box. So you can put in a bunch of print statements, console logging to figure out what's going on. Maybe you integrated something incorrectly, didn't bad instructions, things like that. So lots of great tools there. Kind of take a look at now what the PhoneGap build website looks like. Come back over here. So this is the main app page. I have just a sample dummy app here, name and description. So to get started, you actually zip up all your code. You put your code into a zip and can upload it right from the desktop here, or you can pull it from, again, GitHub and have that build automatically for you. So if you had a new version, you do that. Once you update that and that uploads, that automatically kicks off new builds. So one of the things that is fantastic with this is you see all my different options. You have BlackBerry, Android, Windows Phone, iOS, things like that, and you can rebuild them and then download them here. Because if some of them need security tickets, so that's why you see the errors here, but other ones like APK, this is the actual app compiled and ready to go. So what's really nice is once you upload a new version, it only takes a minute or two for that to build and spit out a fully ready to go app, which is just great. Additionally, if you're using like Android phones, they do have a QR code you can scan to download as well. If you don't want to, which helps you skip the connecting to USB to PC kind of step. There's the plugins that you might have installed. They have really nice documentation for this. So there's tons of third-party plugins that you could create and submit as well, or just use. You can see barcodes, social, Facebook, things like that. There's ones that are fully supported by Adobe and standard. So again, your camera, contact, access, device settings, things like that. So any of those will be used, and you can see them. All they're all open source, so you can see the code, you can see what the open issues are, you can submit your own bugs, things like that, and really get access to how you might use those. And then lastly, from the settings side, you can quickly enable or disable the debugging or hydration features, things like that. So really clean, simple user interface. A lot of power behind this. Absolutely recommend using PhoneGap build for this. Additionally, let's take a look at what the let's take a look at what the PhoneGap build settings file looks like. There's really only one file you interact with, an XML file called config.xml that specifies all the different settings that PhoneGap uses to build the app. So again, basic XML. This is my actual Fitwatchr one. Name, description, and author. All just metadata, has nothing to do with the app itself. The Gap platform right here specifies and tells PhoneGap build which platforms to build for. So you saw in my demo there was about 6 of them that you can build for. I only care about 3: iOS, Android, WinPhone. So that'll skip a lot of unnecessary process time, which speeds everything up. There's a lot of tons and tons of documentation and about these preferences. Some of the useful ones are specifying the exact version of PhoneGap you want to use, how long, if you have a splash screen that loads, how long to show that. This is 3 seconds. And even platform specific options. So in this case, I'm saying deploy only for iOS 7.0. Something that's required that you can do or have help with a designer friend is icons and splash screens. Splash screens are optional, but icons you definitely need for all the platforms. Really, these exist within your source code folder alongside your HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. There's different platforms. So here's all the iOS ones. Different height and width requirements. You can just resize these. Maybe put them in a folder that kind of combines them all together. Here's Android, iPad, things like that. Splash screen, same things. You're pointing to specific file names, and PhoneGap build knows how to build those and compile those together nicely. There's some neat elements here like features. These are your permissions in the app, so what the user has to accept that your app's going to use. So if you use something like Bluetooth or the camera, you'll see that permission here. With my app, I'm just accessing the internet, so that is network, this particular name here. And last, we have our plugins that you want to use. So if you want to drop in or take things out, you look up the names for these in the documentation. I use an in-app browser for the Fitbit OAuth process. GA plugin is for Google Analytics. Some additional console and network info. You can check for network connectivity, things like that. So really just a little bit of settings, and you don't need a lot of these to even get started with a basic app. This is just the one file you need for PhoneGap build. Lastly, this is my actual folder with the code. One of the things, again, I'm coming from a .NET development, Visual Studio, IDE, sort of tools. There's a lot of files that get built and are involved with that. One of the things that's nice with the hybrid approach is it's very low barrier to entry and not a lot of files to worry about. So again, what I demoed is you have one HTML page that represents the app container, an icon or two with splash screen to get started. The config XML has to be in the root, and that's just for PhoneGap build. You might organize everything into scripts, JavaScript, of course, your CSS styles, the icons, and splash screens, and that's just a preference of mine. But really lightweight kind of app, not very big size, but a lot of power. Let's come back over here. So to recap what we built from the hybrid app approach, we were, from the web side of things, we accomplished application logic using JavaScript. We were able to use KendoUI mobile to achieve dynamic native styling for the CSS and just basic HTML for the layout. From the native and native shell side of things, we were able to use PhoneGap and PhoneGap build to take our web code and build a native compiled app out of it, and use PhoneGap native device API or PhoneGap JavaScript APIs to access device specific features. One thing I think as we wrap up here that's nice to consider and everyone has questions about, and there's tons of articles on this, are performance considerations. So you can go ahead and look up different JavaScript benchmarks, how they run on each phone and things like that. And where they argue about different millisecond values, things like that. I'm not going to do that here. You can find all that info. My approach is more of a gut feel and actual experience, and so here's what I can tell you. I look at it in two ways, from the hardware and the software side of things. So from the hardware portion of it, if you think about it, there's these apps are very performant. There's natural improvements over time in how powerful our phones get. We've got amazingly powerful phones in the palm of our hands and our tablets. Always increasing CPU speed, more and more RAM getting thrown into these. So the power is there, definitely there. From the software side of things, each platform does have its pros and cons. The two main ones, iOS and Android, that you might build for, work very well. I think from what I've seen, iOS is definitely the best in terms of performance and building these out. Coming this fall is iOS 8, and they've already announced that they're going to have, again, going back to natural improvements over time, they're increasing the JavaScript performance of the engine that is used for these, and that you take advantage of when you build a PhoneGap app. This one, the improvements here are going to be 4.5 times faster with a new web view that they're going to use. So again, that's the container that runs your code. It is essentially a browser view. Additionally, they're adding WebGL adoption, which can be used for gaming. So you might see more and more games get built in that technology as that becomes more ubiquitous on the very popular iOS platform. From the Android standpoint, already with version 4.4, they added a new web view based on Chromium, which is the open source version of Google Chrome. And as you're probably aware, Google Chrome is known for their V8 JavaScript engine, very fast. So Android is, because there's so many devices and plethora of them, different users with less powerful phones, you might run into some issues. But the higher version of Android you target, the better off you're going to be, realistically. And lastly, I did find that while I did not have to make any changes with my Fitwatchr app for iOS and Android in terms of custom CSS to get them to run to the great look and feel, I did have to make some changes CSS wise with the Windows Phone and building for Windows Phone 8. While iOS and Android are using the similar type of JavaScript and WebView technologies, Windows Phone continues to not, and they're using an IE10 based web view. So the Internet Explorer team is really doing a great job of improving the performance and kind of more standard capabilities, but just note that it is a little bit harder, and there are some things you have to do to support that. So in general, I think you really have to look at your own use cases. I'm not trying to argue that the performance is going to be as good as native. It's just not. But you really should consider what's good enough for your app and your use case. Do you have the time and money to build out for each platform natively? Maybe not. Or maybe you want to prove something out that might turn into something great. Use the hybrid approach. So here's some of the key takeaways. Just kind of segueing from the performance side of things, what are my recommendations for types of apps that you might build and the categories? So from the business side of things, so if you're going from, you have an already existing business, a lot of server-side code, things like that, is this feasible to build a hybrid app for that? I would say absolutely yes. So you can certainly reuse some of your code. This is what I touched on in the beginning. If you have server-side code, you might do heavy processing, things like that. Keep that on the server and push results into the mobile app. You don't want to be draining users' batteries and things like that, so that is still a consideration in 2014, but you can still re-leverage that and maybe create UIs or APIs that your app calls into. Additionally, there might be some reusability out of the scope of this talk, but there is, Xamarin does have a C# library that allows you to use C# code on a mobile device, so that can also be very useful. From the consumer social integration side of things, like my app, which is combining Fitbit and Weight Watchers in this case, absolutely doable, of course. So this is where you might have short to mid-range calculations, maybe some math, not a lot of heavy processing. That's absolutely doable. I found the JavaScript performance to be very quick. Things like that. Again, or you might call into different web APIs and pull back results. That's absolutely doable as well. And most of those, the larger companies have got those performance and timing really down pat. So I don't typically see any problems with that. Games are really the big question, I think, even in 2014. So for simpler games, again, we have WebGL that's about to be released on iOS 8 this fall. There's the HTML5 canvas object for drawing different shapes, and you can build games with that as well. I think those are definitely doable. Even across, we have tons of devices to think about, especially if you're targeting Android, but the performance is getting there. So I'd say that definitely you can use the hybrid approach to build games, especially with WebGL on the rise. However, for more complex games, I think it really depends. Again, all of these, it really depends on your use case. You have to really think through what you're trying to accomplish and what approach is best for you and your company or you individually building apps. I think that this isn't necessarily there, but it's getting there. Again, as performance and hardware increases, and we're already seeing with games built natively, you can have a lot of even MMOs and other types of games like that do work, but they don't necessarily run the best. So we'll see that over time, another few years, and they'll be in a lot better spot. So really, I hope you consider a hybrid mobile approach. You can expand your web development skills if you are new to that, or start learning those and have, again, with the help of KendoUI and some other things, you can create awesome looking UIs with little effort and customization, things like that. And we used PhoneGap Build to build for all devices, which is just an absolutely fantastic tool. So with that said, get building. I have tons of links here to help you get started. There's the KendoUI source code that again is open source. You can download and start building right away. PhoneGap Build is at build.phonegap.com. So you can get started with a free private app. I myself, with that link there, I have a starter template for PhoneGap Build that gives you just the app structure, folder structure, and a default starting config for PhoneGap Build. And here under my public speaking folder, I have this PowerPoint and the demo code that I discussed in the talk. So if you have any questions or feedback for me, again, my name is Matt Netco. You can see me blogging at netco.com. I'm on Twitter at @.netco, or you can reach me at matt.netco@gmail.com. Thank you.